Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down the big, complex topics using the original source material. And today, wow, are we diving into a big one, the final orders from India's market regulator, SEBI, and what has to be one of the most watched corporate sagas of our time. So let's rewind to early 2023. A report drops from a firm called Hindenburg Research, and it's filled with some pretty explosive allegations against the Adani Group. This quote right here, it really captures the heart of one of their biggest claims, that money was being shuffled between group companies through these intermediaries, all under the radar. And let me tell you, that claim kicked off a massive top-to-bottom investigation by the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI. All right, so how do we get from that kind of accusation to a final legal verdict? Well, here's our game plan. First, we'll unpack what Hindenburg was actually claiming. Then, we're going to do what the investigators did. We're going to follow the money trail. After that, we hit the most critical part, the single legal question that this entire case turned on. From there, we'll get into SEBI's final verdict and then zoom out to see what this whole thing means for the market and for investor trust. So let's start with the accusation itself. The basic idea was this. The Adani Group was supposedly using these other companies, firms like Adacorp, Milestone, and Revar, as go-betweens. The allegation was that money was flowing from one public Adani company through one of these intermediaries and then over to another public Adani company. And why would they do that? Well, the claim was it was a way to avoid flagging these deals as related party transactions. Okay, hold on. Before we get any deeper, we really got to get our heads around this term related party transaction, or RPT. So what is it? Put simply, it's any business deal between a company and someone who's closely connected to it. Like the main owners, top executives, or other companies in the same group. Now, because these kinds of deals could have a conflict of interest, there's super strict rules. They have to be disclosed, they have to be approved, all to make sure the smaller minority shareholders aren't getting a raw deal. It's all about fairness and transparency. All right, so with that bombshell allegation on the table, India's market regulator, SEBI, launched a huge investigation. Their number one job? Follow the money. They had to figure out exactly how these funds were moving, if the structure was designed to hide something, and most importantly, if any actual rules were broken in the process. And what SEBI found was a very clear path for the money. Just look at this example. Investigators saw that Adani Ports sent more than 1,200 crore rupees to this intermediary firm called Adicorp. And then, almost like clockwork, Adicorp turned around and sent that same amount to another company in the group, Adani Power. This exact pattern, funds moving from one listed company through an intermediary to another, was right at the center of the investigation. But here's the twist. And honestly, this is one of the most critical findings in SEBI's entire order. 100% of these loans were paid back, every single rupee. And not just that, they were repaid with interest. And here's the real kicker. All of this happened before the Hindenburg report ever saw the light of day. The regulator found zero evidence that any money was siphoned off or that any shareholders were left out of pocket. In fact, the transactions were commercially sound. The intermediary even made a small profit. So, this brings us to the absolute heart of the matter. The investigation confirmed the money moved just like the report claimed. But was it illegal? The entire case, everything SEBI had to decide, didn't come down to the flowcharts of money, but to one very specific, very technical point of law. And here is that question. It wasn't about the rules we have today. It was about the rules that were on the books back when these deals actually happened, between 2012 and 2021. So, was the Adani Group legally required at that time to call these indirect loans routed through an outside company? Was that legally a related party transaction? That's it. That's the whole case. The answer, it turns out, is hiding in plain sight in how the law itself changed. You see, for years, the legal definition of an RPT was pretty narrow. It only covered transactions that were directly between a company and its related party. But in 2021, regulators decided to broaden that definition to include indirect transactions, deals where the ultimate purpose and effect is to benefit a related party. But, and this is so important, this new, tougher definition only fully came into effect on April 1st, 2023. Here's a really easy way to get your head around this legal principle. It's a fundamental idea that you generally can't apply new laws to old actions. You can't be penalized today for doing something that was perfectly legal when you did it, even if the rules have changed since. SEBI had to judge the situation based on the rulebook as it was written back then, not the one we have now. And in fact, SEBI was very deliberate about this. They didn't just change the law overnight. That would have caused chaos in the market. Instead, they gave everyone what the Supreme Court's expert committee later called a glide path. It was a clear, phased-in timeline, giving companies time to understand the new, stricter standards and adjust how they do business. The part of the law that covered these kinds of indirect deals only kicked in April 2023, long after the transactions in question were done and, as we know, fully repaid. So, with that legal framework firmly established, the regulator really had a clear path forward to its final decision. And here it is, in its final orders. SEBI laid out its conclusion, and it was unambiguous. The key takeaway? Because these transactions happened before the new, stricter RPT rules were in force, they were not, technically, a violation of the law. The regulators simply could not apply a new law backwards. This whole line of reasoning was also backed by a committee appointed by the Supreme Court. So, with no breach of the rules and with no money missing, the main allegations just couldn't be proven. Case closed. So, beyond this one case, what's the bigger picture here? What does this all mean? Well, it actually gives us a fascinating peek behind the curtain at how regulators think and how the rules of the market are constantly evolving. This quote from the Supreme Court's expert committee really nails the core principle at play. For a market to be stable and trustworthy, there has to be regulatory certainty. Companies and investors have to know the rules of the game so they can play by them. Making sudden retroactive changes can cause real disruption, and that's exactly why regulators provide these glide paths when they make the rules tougher. When you step back and look at the whole thing, this saga is a perfect illustration of the life cycle of regulation. You have an old rule. A potential loophole or gray area is identified. The regulator then steps in with a clear, forward-looking fix to close that loophole for everyone in the future. And finally, any judgment about past actions is based strictly on the law that was on the books at that specific time. It's a process of constant refinement. And all of this leaves us with a really important question for the future of financial regulation. This case drew a super sharp line in the sand between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. SEBI's verdict came down firmly on the side of the written letter, and it sparks a fundamental debate. When is it more important for regulators to stick to the rulebook to ensure predictability, and when should they have the power to act against something that seems to violate the intent of a rule? It's a tough balancing act, and it's one that regulators all over the world are grappling with every single day.